So Matt Cole, welcome to Whistle Talks.
It's great to be here.
Before we get into the topic, could you explain to us how you got into the industry of EdTech? A little bit about your business as well.
I'd love to. So I've always had one foot in the business world and one foot in the education world, dating even back to as an undergraduate, where I graduated from both a business school and an education school, getting my certification to teach economics mainly in high school, and then also on the business side of things, working through there. So my entire career, I've had a consulting experience moving, whether it be as a teacher back in the early 2000s of teaching the field how to use these really amazing, at that time, right at the turn of the century, these amazing technologies of these things called like PowerPoints and like the web and like how to use a mouse. It really was that rudimentary. It's kind of interesting to say that was the turn of the century, and that was a lot of my consulting practice back then was helping other teachers figure out how to maximize technology to help their students and help them in their profession. And then over the years, that grew as I grew in my education as a principal, as a curriculum director, and then the last 10 years of service in public ed was as a superintendent of schools. And so each time there was a flavor of trying to make a connection between the business world and the education world, and trying to stay at that nexus where they come and decode often, for my education friends and colleagues, knowing like how this business works, or this is how you might, talk to them about being an innovative partner and those type of things. Or on the EdTech side, the simple things of saying things like, hey, I know your email. Don't take it personal. A principal, a superintendent, even of a small school, gets like 200 emails a day. They're all asks. They're all asked. The parent asks, the board asks, the teacher asks, the student asks, and now you've got, solution provider ask. And so they may love your solution, but they're just prioritizing that huge inbox of asks. And so, some of decoding and some of where we work, and I try to share with EdTech companies, is don't be an ask, be a help, right? And then cut through the noise by sharing not just an article that might be connected to your solution and their problems and their needs, but also, make a PowerPoint slide that they could use in a presentation. Give them 3 or 4 social media tweets that they could just, amend or use themselves, right? But as you get into that inbox, right, be a help, because that's going to stick out like a sore thumb. So over the last few years, I decided to step away from being a full-time superintendent, taking a little break, and now I'm working with schools directly still with consulting projects to help systems move forward and leaders move forward. And then also on the EdTech side of things, advising, startups, working on a lot of market research for companies. That is a really nice sweet spot for me of blending that economics and the data science. I did a post-grad program at UT Texas McCombs around data science and business analytics as I transitioned away to, feed my kind of data soul, but also make me be able to keep blending that piece of there are real challenges and real needs on the business side, and there's real challenges and real needs on the school side. And how do they connect, right? And how do they talk, and how do they help each other, and where is their mutual benefit is really where a lot of my practice really becomes on both sides of the ledger for me.
Wow, I've never thought of that, about the whole superintendent having a email box that's flooded. You've definitely been in the industry for such a long time. You've seen it grow and evolve, and seen all the challenges that's come up, all the new sort of technologies, everything. And I mean, who better to develop these sort of systems and solve issues than someone that's got a background in teaching?
They revolutionized education back then. They didn't, but they were supposed to.
That makes so much sense. I don't know how they did it before that. Honestly, like everything must have been before even projectors and presentations. I don't know how they must have done that. So you've really seen all the trends and everything. Obviously, today we've got AI doing so many things. I have to ask about that. How has AI kind of changed or benefited the industry of EdTech?
On the investor side for EdTech, if you don't have it somewhere in your solution or at least roadmap, right, they're not very interested to talk to you. So, the real pressure on a founder, on a startup team, or even an existing, company and solution is how do you integrate it, and how do you do that, smartly and purposefully and intentionally. I think we're still at the very headwaters of that conversation, because the educational institutional side is pretty reluctant. I think there's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of caution, a lot of concern about, academic integrity, about cognitive requirements for kids, and what is this all going to do? I do think, again, I was working at the turn of the century when the internet was going to totally change, like everything, and have education just be flipped on its head here in the States. That didn't happen. There's a part of me that looks at our origin story and looks at, how in the States that it's a one-room schoolhouse, right, in the 1800s in Massachusetts, and the entire system kind of evolves from that, meaning that it's very decentralized. Communities have a lot of input, right, and a lot of say on what they want for their kids and where they want to be. And those are all strengths, except for often when it comes to innovation and comes to these things. It'll be a varied landscape where in the United States, you have economies that are flourishing and that are really dialed in to cutting edge industry and changing, and really are plugged into that. And then you have a number of areas, right, that are kind of old economy and are less likely to embrace that. And so it'll be very interesting. It's certainly going to have an impact.
One, definitely.
Right. It certainly is having an impact. I think much like all of the technology I've seen come through over the last couple decades, the kids will be ahead of it. I mean, the kids will embrace it. The kids will understand this is just how you do it. The kids will start teaching the teachers how to do things. The kids will start asking questions, right? But treated as a learning tool, just like the internet. The internet will replace teachers. AI is not going to, I don't think, is going to replace teachers wholesale. They'll still be brick and mortar. There'll still be, these things, these places that we conjugate with kids. I think it'll provide, just like the internet did, it'll provide more equity and access for students who maybe are in a system that aren't pushing forward on things, because now they'll be able to access a whole new world of learning and different kind of learning to move forward. I mean, I do think the speed, of course, too, is moving quicker than in the early 2000s with the internet. AI is going to have a place. AI is going to have an impact. I'm a huge advocate for it. I know my own work, whether that's working with schools on, doing focus groups, interviews, that kind of primary research, plugging that into an audio, being able to get a transcript, being able to use some AI to process that transcript, all happens much quicker than in the olden days, where I was doing that just with my own feeble mind, right? That would take a few weeks, where now I can move through some of that, in a few hours. There's still a lot of human review. There's still a lot of human thought to it, right? I'm not going to put something forward that isn't making sense to me as my lived experience and my review. But like a lot of research assistant type work, I think with EdTech companies finding a way to embed it to, again, be a help, right? Like how do you reduce the teacher load? I'm working with a few companies, right, that look at it that way. One is Unique Learn, where it's really trying to take the notion of what we've always wanted to do, personalized learning, right, and really customize for each student, but be able to use the standards, use student interest profiles, use a blended bunch of data sets, and then as you move forward, be able to create customized, math problems and customized writing prompts and customized things, so that I'm going to be writing to my passions, my interests. I'm going to keep exploring that through those assignments, instead of every student gets the same assignment, even if it's just a word problem. right? Like in a math setting. And kids like to see what they like to see, right? Like we all do. And be done behind the scenes with the power of AI, which is really awesome. So you're helping a teacher, you're engaging kids more, right? And it's all just based on, putting together the right code to have the good user interface that they're working on for teachers. And before you know it, things that would have taken us as when I was teaching, that kind of thought. I had 180 kids as teaching in a high school setting over the course, of a day. Like if I had to try to figure out 180 different versions of a word problem, my heart would say to do it, but I would never actually have the time or resources, and it wouldn't make sense. The return on investment wouldn't be right for me, right, as a teacher. But with today and with AI and with really smart solution providers embedding it for instructional purposes, not just as a gadget or an extra, right, but is delivering on the promise of the solution they're trying to put forward to the problems that they see.
So it's basically helping you customize and personalize your offerings to help children be more engaged and more likely to retain information and learn quicker. Years ago, they always said robots are going to overtake teachers. From what you've said, doesn't seem like that's going to happen anytime soon, or like that's necessary to happen.
No, I think it's this blending between a business vernacular, right, like a value proposition, and an educational purpose piece, right, like being passionate for helping kids. Well, where those two things now intersect, what I was saying when I was leading a public school with my staff is we need to reconceptualize how we render ourselves relevant to this new world. And the one thing I knew, I had about 200 teachers in my system, about 1,500 kids that I was leading. The one thing I really knew is that those 200 teachers knew our kids, engaged with our kids, and loved our kids more than any technology ever could. So
100%.
So the evolution that needs to take place, right, is the value proposition and rendering ourselves relevant is now I'm not the source of all information. Like when I started my career in the 90s, there was a little bit more of a belief that the teacher at the front should be the source of the information. No, now the source of information, like there's far better sources of information out there. We need, but where do we come in play is teaching students how to interpret that, teaching students how to process that, think through that, and being there for them, right? Like students get more inputs from social media, from academic inputs, right? Like they have so much more coming at them than, again, when I grew up before the turn of the century. It does feel like those stories because, right, like I had one phone in my house and it was like hardwired, right? Like for everybody. Like that was life, for some of us adults that are teaching and leading systems. That's our reality when we were kids, right? Kids are now walking around with like access to the entire world in the palm of their hands. And so like, how do we love them? How do we coach them? How do we support them to figure out the crazy world that they're in? I don't think any level of AI or technology really can replace that. And so it's just about shifting what we're doing in schools and how we're working with kids. And I think we'll evolve. Those things seem to bubble to the top fairly naturally.
Do you feel quite a lot of pressure doing what you do? Do you feel like the educators and teachers and parents, students have really high expectations of your technologies, your solutions?
The range often in a school system of the skeptics, right? Of there's going to be your early adopters, and then there's the ones that will come very, if ever, very at the very end, right? And so you have that natural distribution across that innovation curve, and so that's in our communities, that's in our schools, right? Where you'll have a handful of students and teachers that really want to be on the cutting edge and press forward and get it and see how it works for them. Right. And then you have some, skeptics that, are just waiting for a mistake to happen. I think the real pressure becomes on some of the EdTech solution providers, because I think with some of our experience of streaming now, right, TV is now a streaming experience, like high on demand, access to what I want, when I want, how I want it. The Amazon experience, right?
Of
And
course.
so the user interface piece, which often does take some iterations to develop, right? For younger companies or new companies entering into a space. I mean, there's really high expectations of pressure on them, right? To have it be like those other experiences. And, for those folks that have lived through that and done that, I mean, that takes some incubating. Like when we try to work with companies, it's trying to figure out, we'll find one lab school, right? Like really embed in a school that's willing to be a partner with you, so that as you're developing the user interface, as you're developing, different parts of your product features, you get real-time feedback on that. Or things like the EdMarket Pulse, working with a company now that wanted to test out like a different way of referring to something that's always been referred to something for a really long time. Well, before you launch a whole thing, it's kind of that lean startup approach, right? Is get out there and ask people. So one of the things I really enjoy is working with companies, because that does connect schools, right? And the elevating customer voice, and then being able to interpret that and really digest that to say that points you in the right direction for product feature iterations, even for marketing, like what messaging, and then even in the sales cycle, like to say, like, we'll test some of this out with, people that are your friends, so to speak, right? Like that create an advisory council or create a community of practice group, or, doing some of these things that are not as used as tools, I think, as my advocacy says they probably should be. But man, I know if I wanted to change something in my system and I didn't ask teachers before I started, like it was never going to work, right? And so, all too often, I think really smart, well-intentioned solutions start getting ahead of steam and get well developed, and then aren't synced up with the market, aren't synced up because there wasn't enough customer voice in the process, either the development or the marketing or the sales, to really have good iterative feedback on that side of things as well.
You spoke about now how you speak to teachers and educators and gather feedback to enhance your products, update a solution. What is the process that you usually go through? Do you sit in a classroom? What sort of research do you usually do?
Yeah, I think we offer a continuum of options based on what the outcome somebody wants, right? So the continuum of engagement, ranges from traditional surveys. We have a national
Okay.
survey out in the field around SEL for a group that we work with. The EdMarket Pulse, which is a targeted, kind of like, here's what 100 people say about X, and 3 or 4 questions around that. So not a big survey, but targeted around specific things. Kind of the middle of that continuum is targeted interviews or focus groups. Again, that's usually works really well if you're looking at a specific feature or a specific nomenclature or a specific kind of thing. As well, let's go grab some people, ask them, work them through that process. And then the longer term relational pieces is, again, working with groups to say, do you have an advisory council of the personas that are in your wheelhouse? Do you have communities of practice, right? Like if you're an organization, do you have a group of fellows, right? Maybe you create something that's 25 fellows and you're professionally developing them around the solution and the thoughts that the thought leading that you're doing in the space. So they're benefiting from that, but also now you've got a connected group that you can always ask 1 or 2 questions to in a wide range of things. And then the deeper one is, again, creating like a lab school system that is maybe 1, 2, geographically pretty close to wherever the developers are, right? So they can, you can get there and you can see kids, right? The relationship you develop is that now they can see students working in the interface, right? As a participant observer of doing some like ethnographic type research. And, then do the same range of focus groups and surveys like inside of that. And so, I think it depends on the scope and the magnitude of what somebody's working on. And then I think it works in all parts of it, of product development, but also marketing, and getting a good strategic marketing plan and asking some questions of small groups of people before you invest a lot more money. Again, it's all embedded in kind of the lean approach to being agile and getting iterative feedback loops, not guessing, right? Not using our assumptions and our biases to kind of lead the answers, but testing them and say, all right, we think this, let's ask. The more that students and teachers and administrators' voice is in the process, the better. Everybody wins, right? The field wins, the solution provider wins. Like it's just a mutual benefit to create situations where people are learning from each other.
I'm assuming this is how you build credibility and trust in the EdTech space for educators, parents, children to know that you've done your research. You obviously make sure that your solutions are aligned to help real world issues.
Like most solution providers are, again, in the right area, but it's all about that fine tuning, the alignment, the calibration, right? That makes a huge difference. And it's best done when you're out there, right? When you're in the field in some way, you're testing some of those assumptions, some of those features, you're getting real feedback, you're watching like you're in a user experience piece, like how much more powerful is it if you were sitting in a room, not even engaging them, but just watching for 20 minutes, right? Students interface with whatever it is you're asking them to do. I mean, you're going to learn a lot of nonverbals, body language, like all of those things that are actually happening, and be able to integrate those as well. And then you can follow that up with a small focus group of them, right? Like, hey, I noticed at this point of the time, I noticed this. What was really going on there, right? And drilling in. But all of it enhances the work for everybody.
But I can tell that you've just got so much to say.
Economics or education, I can talk quite a bit about. But yeah, I'm happy to help out anyway, and I really appreciate the opportunity. It's great to be.
It just shows you how passionate you are about something so important and so special, and shaping the future of everyone. So yeah, Matt, it's been amazing to have you.
Great, I appreciate it.